Hello, and thank you very much for coming along. This evening we're going to do a little bit of a demo and exploration, mutual exploration project to look at how you can use the online access to transition studies to look into problems of food and agriculture. For example, Monsanto has been very active these days, and it's merged with one of the biggest petrochemical companies in the world. It also turns out to be a pharmaceutical company. That alliance between petrochemical, pharmaceutical, and agribusiness is starting to, in effect, choke off the world's food supply. And you can keep in touch with this, not through any newspapers, because most of the newspapers are supported, I'm afraid, by a combination of those kinds of advertisers: petrochemical, automotive, tractors, agribusiness. You can't count on the corporate media to be able to deliver objective reporting on the circumstances in their own bailiwick, and their own bailiwick at this point is a highly petro-intensive form of agricultural production, which actually uses more energy in production than it produces or captures from solar energy. It's an energy sink. Yet you don't see articles emerging in the mainstream media about how agriculture has become an energy sink and a huge contributor to the problem of global warming. Not a solution to global warming, but a major problem. Beef production, hog production, chicken production around the world are energy intensive feedlot operations, ones that are having a staggering impact around the world. And yet Monsanto is pretending that they're producing food for the benefit of the world. That's going to be more and more necessary to produce by their techniques because of the coming global climate crisis. Well, we want to look into ways in which you can explore this on your own. We've had a number of programs on it before on the Cambridge Community Television System, and you can look those up. You can look them up in the same place you can find the information that you can draw upon for your own research: papers, books, articles you may want to write, or essays you may want to submit. Let's take a look at how you can do this rather simply through the Transition Studies website. There's a little search engine down here on the right, which if you look at it, I'll blow it up a bit, you can see, you can put in, search this site, a word like Monsanto, and just hit search, and it'll come back then with a series of articles or news stories in one way or another, or interviews or reports that are really quite instructive. Now, they're not in any particular order except the order that they were entered when the participants in the collaborative that puts this transition studies together uploaded them. So you have to check very carefully, not just when it's posted. In this case, for example, there's a story on former polluter from Monsanto nominated to head environmental agency. Okay, we can tell from this that it's posted on November 2nd, but that doesn't mean it was originated on November 2nd. You have to call up the article or the interview itself and see from that where it was posted. And there you see it's a YouTube connection. Take a look.
A former Monsanto executive has been nominated to be the new head of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Really, if approved, this former Monsanto employee is going to be making decisions on a daily basis. It's going to affect our environment, going to affect, endangered species. Look, Monsanto probably has done more to deplete endangered species than any company I can think of. So this woman has been hired. I think the big push here, well, she's minority. She's an African American that's been hired to take this job. Well, the problem is she has zero experience in anything that would qualify her to do this. She's a lawyer and she's a molecular genetic scientist. Has never worked in wildlife at all. What is, when you read this, did you have the same reaction I did?
Well,
trying to look like, gee, I'm putting an African American woman up front and I'm okay.
Well, you know, and here's the thing too. You pointed out, well, you know, she got that molecular geneticist degree, a law degree. Those are great credentials. Unfortunately, for the Fish and Wildlife Service, there's actually a rule that says you have to have experience in fish and wildlife.
Yeah.
And the only experience that she has from working Monsanto with fish and wildlife is killing it. And giving the fish and wildlife, you know, tumors and cancers. We know that from lab studies.
Well, we know it. We know it. Actually, I know it from documents.
Right.
Actually, documents I've reviewed where Monsanto is saying, you know, we're not so sure this Roundup, this glyphosate we're making, isn't killing fishes. Yeah, it is not killing fish and is not affecting wildlife in a really, really bad way. So this is who she comes. This is where she comes from.
Well, it is, and you know, this is a horrible move by this administration. Completely something we would expect, really. But Monsanto has done a great job of hedging their bets on both political parties. They've been doing it, you know, since they got the EPA back in the 90s to reverse their decision about Roundup causing cancer. It's because they have so much influence and so much money, they can buy either political party and get their way, and that's what's happened here. They gave $25,000 to the inaugural fund back in early 2017.
Well, they've given a lot more than that.
Well, right, but that was just to the inauguration party.
Right.
And now this is their payback. They get their person at Fish and Wildlife, they get regulations slashed, they're allowed to run rampant, whatever they want.
They get to declare that we are, you know, we're the new and improved Trump administration. We're bringing African Americans now to make decisions. But this is classic. I mean, I think your point, the most she hasn't been. This isn't final at this point.
Right. She will be. I mean, the Senate's not going to stop her.
The Senate will not stop her. But I think it's so interesting that even that on the books, there's always been clearly on the books that a person who takes this position has got to have extensive experience in wildlife management.
Yeah.
She has zero. They're going to have to make an exception here, and your call is the same as mine. They will make the exception. I thought it was interesting. Ducks Unlimited came out and said, "Oh, this is a wonderful selection." I mean, what is that about? Is it the you know, unlimited duck dinners by Christmas, or what is that about? I don't quite understand that connection. But thanks for joining me, Farron. These stories, as I say every week, we see a different angle on what's happening in politics in this country. And most of these stories right now are getting a little freakish.
They are.
Right. Well, you can get access to these stories on this platform where they're listed, transitionstudies.net. And you could take up different topics. Greenpeace, for example, put out a report about how Monsanto's been promoting fake farmers groups in order to try to push their products, especially glyphosate, on a wider and unsuspecting public. Take a look.
I'm Jeff Deal, the guy who stopped automatic gas tax hikes. And now, I'm out to stop partisan gridlock in Washington. That's why
An investigation carried out by Greenpeace says it's uncovered some startling truths.
Now notice how you had to take an ad from YouTube before you could get to the story. Now you can buy a special subscription to YouTube that basically can eliminate these ads, but then you're paying for the ad in another way. You're paying for its elimination. Let's just listen to the story, though. Forget the ad for a moment, most of which are political at this time of year.
An investigation carried out by Greenpeace says it's uncovered some startling truths about how Monsanto, a company notorious for its controversial range of weed killers, has been covertly lobbying its interests in the EU. The investigation alleges that hundreds of thousands of euros were spent in creating fake farmers' groups to promote the main chemical found in Monsanto's product. So, fake farmers, fake groups. At least that's according to Greenpeace. But when RT looked a little bit closer, something didn't quite smell right. Greenpeace say that this lobby group in France isn't real. But when RT searched for the people behind the names, we unearthed real farmers.
It's fake news. It's not good. It's not true. I'm real, and I know other members that are real farmers who work every day. I'm not fake. I'm not a ghost. I'm a real farmer. I'm passionate about my work.
We asked Greenpeace to detail why they believed the farmers were fake. Despite giving the organisation 5 days to respond, Greenpeace said it didn't have the capacity to get back to us as staff was swamped. So the farmers are definitely flesh and bone. But who's behind this organisation supporting the chemical? Is it the notorious Monsanto? Denis isn't sure.
I can't list the companies as I don't know them by heart, but I understand why the industry and its farmers defend themselves. Everybody criticises Monsanto. I don't want to defend them. Monsanto produces very little of the glyphosate in the world. It's other countries and companies that produce the most.
Denis says he cares about the land, this land, his product. So why does he use a product that's been labelled as toxic to aquatic life and is described as a probable human carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer?
All the other analysis and tests, we're talking about 800 studies in the world, confirm that this product is not dangerous. Why do we use glyphosate? Because it's practical, because we use very diluted amounts. You want to punish us by removing it while it's not considered dangerous.
In a landmark ruling, a judge in the US awarded a former groundskeeper $39 million after he developed cancer following exposure to the company's weed killer, saying Monsanto had failed to warn him of the risks. Monsanto denies the product causes cancer. Some countries aren't sold on the safety of the chemical and have already restricted its use. But the farmer we talked to is worried that a ban on the weed killer will do more harm than good.
We shouldn't forget that if we are the only country to stop using it, we will be disadvantaged. The primary task of carbon emissions will increase. We will need to work the soil more and overuse the equipment. More work hours instead of a little dose of glyphosate, which allows us to make the work easier, and we shouldn't forget about that.
Pharmaceutical group Bayer, which owns Monsanto now, has dismissed claims that the chemical in question is carcinogenic. And that's despite repeated warnings made by the World Health Organization on this issue. An agricultural expert we spoke to says that science has yet to produce a conclusive verdict.
You know, you don't see animals and non-target plants keeling over and dying in an immediate manner. The problems are related to much more subtle effects on ecosystems and on human health that are linked to the sheer amount of glyphosate that is being used. And I believe it is essential that more research is done. The science is not clear, but to turn around and say that the use of glyphosate containing herbicides is safe does not fit with the overall science at all.
Okay, well, you can get a sense of some of the controversy there. In this case, not in the United States, but in the European context. Monsanto is forcing itself upon European farmers, and according to Greenpeace, some of these farming groups are totally fake. Well, the farmers aren't fake, but the groups promoting the material may well be fake farmer groups. Look into it. This is the kind of story that isn't itself definitive by any means. In fact, this should just pique your appetite for looking further into the issue. The whole point of using a resource like transition studies for this kind of research is not to arrive at conclusions, but to arrive at the use of source material that you can drive back to peer-reviewed articles and scientific reports that are authoritative. In this sense, transition studies is a kind of platform. It's kind of an association of articles and interviews and access points to reports that allow you to take research to the first level of documentation. You go out beyond these reports to the source material and trace down the topics you want to pursue. Go ahead back to other things in Monsanto. Glyphosate goes beyond us, according to another report. Take a look.
With Elizabeth Warren focused on running for president,
I am running.
It begs the question.
Well, we've been following this story closely since the California verdict broke on the weed killer and ingredients of glyphosate. And the latest environmental working group found traces of the ingredients in children's breakfast cereals, but the outrage has expanded beyond the U.S. Sarah Montes de Oca has the details.
The Environmental Working Group report on glyphosate in cereal released last week fueled a lot of European criticism. But those in Europe in favor of banning the herbicide admit that it is a very lengthy process. Arnaud Apotheker, managing director of the NGO Justice Pesticides, says, "I'm not very confident that the decision in the U.S. will expedite a ban in Europe, as it's a complicated legal process that takes time." In 2015, when the International Agency for Research on Cancer found that glyphosate was probably carcinogenic, many European countries urged governments to ban the use of the herbicide. But after years of debate in a pivotal vote last year, the EU renewed the use of the controversial weed killer for 5 years. That is, at least until the end of 2022.
So you can see it's a huge debate, largely in Italy and in France and throughout the European Union, and it's something you can get resources to research from transition studies. These aren't useful as final documents. They are keys to get access to final documents. And that is quite helpful in itself. Democracy Now! Occasionally carries reports on Monsanto.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We are looking at Friday's historic verdict in a lawsuit against U.S. agribusiness giant Monsanto. In a groundbreaking decision, a jury in California ordered Monsanto to pay $289 million in damages to a school groundskeeper who developed cancer after regularly using the weed killer Roundup on the school lawns. The 46-year-old man, Dwayne Lee Johnson, has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Doctors say he's unlikely to live past 2020. Johnson's was the first lawsuit to go to trial alleging glyphosate causes cancer. We just spoke with the lead attorney in the case. Now we're going to Kansas City, Missouri, where we're joined by Carrie Gillum, a veteran investigative journalist, author of Whitewash, the story of a weed killer, cancer, and the corruption of science. She's covered corporate America for 25 years, now research director for U.S. Right to Know. In your book, Carrie, you write, "It's the pesticide on our dinner plates, a chemical so pervasive it's in the air we breathe, our water, our soil, and even increasingly found in our own bodies. Known as Monsanto's Roundup by consumers and as glyphosate by scientists, the world's most popular weed killer is used everywhere from backyard gardens to golf courses to millions of acres of farmland." Carrie Gillum, what does this historic verdict, nearly $300 million to one person, mean for this chemical?
Yeah, thank you and good morning. I think it is historic, as Brent mentioned. This vindicates really years and years, decades of independent scientific work studying this chemical and this herbicide. You know, we went from about 40 million pounds of glyphosate used in the 1990s to close to 300 million pounds used now in the United States. This is the most widely used weed killer ever in the history of the world. And this is primarily because Monsanto has spent so much time and effort marketing this to be used in so many different ways and to be used so pervasively in food production. And of course the main selling point has been that it is so very safe, so much safer than any other herbicide out there. Safe enough to convince our regulators to allow ever increasingly higher levels of this pesticide in our food. And as you mentioned, it is. Evidence shows us it's very routinely found in our water, in our food, in our soil, in our air. U.S. scientists have even documented it coming down as rainfall.
And so the use of this, in the last minutes that Brent Wisner was on, he talked about, for example, immigrant workers that deal with this. I mean, in California, how many people, how many farm workers are exposed to this? Can they bring lawsuits when they get sick? What about undocumented workers?
Right. I mean, there are thousands of people around the United States, obviously, who have already filed suit, thousands more who are waiting in the wings, I'm told, from all of the different plaintiffs' attorneys I've talked to around the country. There are people around the world who are very concerned as well. Some farm workers in Argentina have already tried to sue Monsanto. They've had trouble in U.S. courts bringing Monsanto to account for what they have alleged are birth defects in their children because of their exposure to glyphosate and Roundup. There are people in Europe who are similarly concerned and trying to move forward on litigation. So I think the world has really, woken up to this problem just in the last several years. Now, I've been tracking it, since the late 1990s and through the 2000s. I mean, that was my job at Reuters, really, was to cover this company and, its profit stream and its business model. And of course, Roundup has been a huge part of Monsanto's business model, billions of dollars in revenues every year, tied not just to the chemical, but of course the GMO seeds that Monsanto designed specifically to encourage the use of Roundup. Roundup Ready seeds and Roundup Ready and Roundup herbicide.
That's what you need to look at there. They are genetically modifying crops to be, as she calls them, Roundup Ready. That is to say, they will be able to resist the herbicide, glyphosate, that's applied to the field while every other plant is killed, because they've been genetically modified to be Roundup Ready. Now you got to realize that that's a big problem for agriculture. If you're killing everything else except a genetically modified plant that you put there to grow, the strategy is one of ecocide. Kill everything else except the plant you own a patent to. That's a very dangerous strategy and pathway to go down, and increasingly to get more and more people dependent upon, because you want to expand your market share, in a global ecosystem. You got to understand that the stability of the global food system ultimately rests upon variety, not simplification. If it becomes hypercoherent to depend on a few crops grown in narrower and narrower regions with greater and greater subsidies from chemicals, fertilizers, and irrigated water, you're in real trouble when any one of those becomes either too expensive or non-existent. Suppose you convert your whole system to work to produce rice in irrigated fields, and then the rains fail. You can have all the irrigation canals you want, but if you can't direct the non-existent water that hasn't rained in the hills toward those fields that you've made irrigation accessible, you're not going to be able to grow a single thing. So there are problems with the American food supply, not just the American food supply, the global food supply, that are becoming more and more acute as greater and greater concentrations of power determine not only what crops are grown, but what plants are used to provide that crop. Only plants that are genetically modified to resist an herbicide that we know is carcinogenous, it's really not stable. We'll look into this further. Thank you very much.